Welcome to the Becoming Human Project podcast. I'm delighted to have the second installment of my series on philosopher entrepreneurs, and this is someone I've been wanting to interview for years. His name is David McKerracher, and he's doing what I think is one of the most important things in the world right now. He's showing dynamically what philosophy as a way of life really looks like. And even more interestingly, David is doing it from the standpoint of someone who was long committed to the left, who has a deep understanding and concern for the structural problems of labor and of capitalism, but has moved beyond any sort of polemical stance into what he calls a post-left position that I'm excited to have him talk about today. And in doing that, he's created not just theory, although he has created a very central theory centered around a concept he came to in his master's work called Timenergy, but he's actually created a new institutional form of life that's embodied in his project called Theory Underground. So welcome, David McKerracher of Theory Underground. Thank you so much for being on Becoming Human.
Wow, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So David, can you tell us about your journey to philosophy? Were you raised in a sort of intellectual philosophical household, or how did you come to, say, your interest in philosophy? Was it initially academic or existential? What's sort of the origin story?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I didn't really ever go to school. I never had any formal education before the age of 22. I described myself as a feral child raised in the woods. I think that was the author bio of my first book. It was a feral child raised in the woods, and
That'll probably be our
that's a little bit
YouTube
of
heading. Feral child raised in the woods.
yeah,
Becomes
yeah,
philosopher. Zizek-Endorsed feral child. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that is itself, maybe the story, the tagline, but it's a obvious hyperbole, right? My parents never take offense to me saying that, which is really a grace on their behalf, because of course, a true feral child would be raised without language. So I was not raised without language. I just had more freedom than most people. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. But it wasn't just freedom. It was also that my parents were what I call first generation deliberate parents. Now, that is not to cast any shade upon my grandparents, who are amazing people across the board. They're all really inspirational. But they were all working within institutions, whether that be the military, whether that be a hospital, a public school. And so my parents kind of went off the grid in a sort of sense, right? So first they moved to the United States from Canada. And so they were immigrants, but because they were white, because they're from Canada, they're English speaking, they don't really appear to be immigrants. And so there were all kinds of weird things that came with that when they were living in California. And then at some point they got sort of radicalized into Christianity. There was a big homeschool movement at the time there in the 80s. And so they moved from the Bay Area of California to the woods of North Idaho. And I was just a little kid. I'd never been in a formal educational environment up to that point. And all of a sudden I just had this boundless freedom to run around in the woods and, play with swords or whatever, what kids tend to do, build forts and stuff like that. There's all kinds of really good things that come with that. And then I also have my critique of homeschooling based on those experiences, which I get into towards the end of my book, Timenergy, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I'll just say no formal education before the age of 22 meant never sitting in a real classroom. It meant no exposure to anyone who was truly passionate about any subject matters whatsoever. So my mom tried to wear many hats, pioneer woman, which was where her heart was really at. Also teacher to some extent, but that's not really her area of expertise. She was just trying the best she could to do with what she thought was right. She didn't really have a passion for math, for English, for history, for geography, for any of these things. She's just doing what she thinks she needs to do. And that's one of the problems with the school system, in general, really, is people doing it because they think they need to do it, because we got to check these boxes so that we can get the right jobs or whatever later. And so whether you're doing homeschool or public school or some kind of cool alternative or private school, the fact is if you're treating education like a series of boxes that you need to check off, things that you need to memorize and then regurgitate, basic rules that you need to internalize, well, then I would say, and I think maybe you would agree, that you're kind of missing the point of education and, more importantly, philosophy as a way of life, which wasn't something that I discovered until much later.
Absolutely. Okay, well, this is great. So let's start with the homeschooling because so many people have misconceptions, and I think it'd be great. I actually had not realized this, the feral child being the homeschooling. So have you seen the movie Captain Fantastic?
Not yet. I've wanted to for a while now.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Well, we'll have to have another episode because where we could talk about that because I feel like it's such a great challenge. It's a sort of, it's a it's a very well-made movie, but it's a really good topical movie for discussing homeschooling. So, in terms of your own experience then of encountering the critiques of homeschooling, like I was exposed to those. I was homeschooled until I went to college. So my first experience of a classroom was also basically, I mean, I was in church, so obviously there's a lot of classrooms in the kind of church I was raised in. But the academic setting, I loved it when I was 18. I didn't have all the ennui that people have. But what do you think is the general perception of homeschoolers? And could you then respond to that, whether you think it's fair or actually deeply distorted? And then what would be your own sort of, general take on it as someone who I know is also soon going to be a parent and thinking deeply about how you apply your work as a philosopher, an educator to your own child. I think it's an important starting place because we're in such a crisis of education. So if you want to talk a bit about that, we can just roll as you want. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on homeschooling generally as it's perceived by people who don't tend to know homeschoolers, what your experience was, how you think about it as a philosopher. I guess that's where maybe you can take it. Yeah.
Yeah. How it shaped me is a much deeper question, maybe for socioanalysis. And I have, been learning how to socioanalyze a life and which is to say it's like psychoanalysis, but instead of, having a patient on the couch, we're instead thinking in Bourdieuian terms. What are the fields that one has navigated to get to where they are? What are the fields on their horizon of possibility? What are what is the gravity and the tendencies of those different fields? And of course, in order to navigate those fields successfully or not, we develop a certain kind of habitus on the way through, and right? And so we can kind of think about this in a sort of Heideggerian sense, because of course Bourdieu is, but also in a sort of Marxian sense, because he also is doing that. And so, for me, I was also raised in a church, and I would say that there wasn't really much in terms of education outside of, Sunday school kind of stuff, some very basic stuff like that. But the formative piece of being a homeschooler and how that relates to the general perception of the homeschooler, if we're thinking in socioanalytic terms, Bourdieu says that the group image the shapes how you live or how you navigate a field. So if there is a general stereotype about a group, and it's a group that people are going to routinely assign you to and sort of reduce you into and think about you in reference to that group image, well, then that's going to be a constant thing that you have to work with or battle against. And so I would say the common perception of homeschoolers is that they're obsessively nerdy but socially awkward, or they're just neglected in general. And so it's like, well, in the best case, you have someone who's passionate about things and they know how to teach themselves, and they're, self-motivated, and maybe they don't ever shut up because they're just really excited.
Right.
That would be on the one side. On the other side, they become social recluses or social dunces or whatever. Awkward would be the word. And I would say I've in my life been a mixture of the two. Especially early on, I would say it was very awkward and confusing trying to pick up on social norms. And so I relate heavily to people who describe autism, but the thing is for me, it was curable with socialization. Whereas for other people, it's not maybe it's not because it's something where they have been socialized and to some extent. I just wasn't at all. And so I was constantly running into these invisible barriers and I didn't understand what was up. And in a lot of cases, it took someone who most people would consider to be rude saying it out loud for me to register, oh, that's a thing, right? And so, like, I think examples of social awkwardness might include being overly fidgety, thinking you're the only person in the room, these kinds of things that quickly get socialized out of you if you go through any kind of normal education institution. And so that, I would say the stereotype was something that I actually lived with. It's something that I experienced firsthand. I was it. And that to some extent, I would say I've grown beyond it. To some extent, I've been able to adapt and adjust into a rich variety of social scenes and learn how to be one of the people in any sort of situation. And I would say that my favorite along my journey as a teenager, when things were most awkward, was the music scene in Spokane, Washington, because those were the most open-minded people that I met along the way. So open-mindedness, agreeableness, but also to some extent social rejects or some kind of people with a chip on their shoulder towards the broader systems, but loving towards the other people who come to shows. And so I got really into the music scene there between, I'd say 2006 and 2012 was the sort of golden period when I was there. And, I still go for the occasional concert, and there's lots of old friendly faces, and the loving heart of that alternative scene is still there. And it's something that is really just priceless and immeasurable. But then I would say the other socializing factor would just be all of the other institutions that I've navigated, and most of those being workplaces. And I've worked a lot of different kinds of jobs.
This is fascinating. So your experience of homeschooling, I'm almost surprised. I didn't know that you would endorse the stereotype, because my impression was always that I always find there's this weird lack of agency. Like a public school or any school has a student for 8+ hours a day, and all of the morons and socially awkward people who go to school are never attributed to the school.
True.
And
True.
whereas families seem to me to be the determinants of that kind of behavioral it's code. And so I really appreciate your sort of like, oh, I was the stereotype. At the same time, even when I was young, I was like, wait, I mean, most people in public school are like 900 years behind the reading level. Like, what do you mean that school is like essential? But I understand when you're saying socialization, you have this concept from, for those who are listening, maybe don't know, Pierre Bourdieu is a great French sociological theorist of the post-World War II era. And he has this concept of fields, like social fields. He was influenced by the developments in physics, and he analogized them. So what do you see then? So you're sort of copping to the stereotype in the negative sense, which is very charming. What do you see as the big advantage? Like, how would you existentially weigh the freedom? And then how did that lead you? Where in that framework did you discover philosophy?
The benefit or sort of superpower that comes from being homeschooled is that if you do get into a subject matter, chances are it's not because it's being forced into you, right? Like, I don't know. To me, it seems like people are trying to survive in the middle school environment. They're going through puberty. They're incredibly awkward already as a result of that. And then at the same time, they're forced to sit in close quarters in large groups for an hour here, an hour there, an hour here, an hour there. And you're supposed to focus on this, and then you're supposed to focus on that. And you're supposed to focus on this. And I call that structural ADHD. Like the idea that the structure or the system itself is forcing you to focus on things that are arbitrarily related to your life, arbitrarily related to your day. Why are you doing math at 1 p.m.? What is it about math that you are doing it at 1 p.m.? Nothing, absolutely nothing at all. And it doesn't relate to your life at all. And so a person who's trying to survive in this environment either learns to be the teacher's pet, check off the boxes, jump through the hoops, or they become pegged as that person who's resistant, who's maybe a trouble child. And of course, the moment you're pegged with that, it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to see yourself as that. Maybe your parents start to see you as that. And so in my life, I've had a lot of friends, and most of them have been through these K through 12 institutions, and some are much better than others, but certain universals exist across the board. And so I'm going to do some armchair sociological statistics here. Like armchair meaning I'm just pulling this off the top of my head based off of what my gut tells me. So take it with a grain of salt. But if we zoom out, I would say that the current education system is producing a quarter of the country that fears or hates mathematics, a quarter of the country that fears or hates English, and then another quarter of the country that is a mixture of the fear and hate for both sides of that equation, and then another quarter of the country that is good at both. And in a lot of cases, the side that likes either English or math really doesn't like the other side. And, except you do have these people who are more well-rounded. But then there's this deeper question, which is, okay, so you really liked math, or okay, so you really liked English, but did you learn how to be a person who lives a life in this language, or in a sort of mathematical mindset? Or did you learn how to perform well in classes where that is the purported subject matter? Because all of the classes have certain things in common now because of standardization, especially. Are you really just good at this thing when it's standardized in this way, when it's been instrumentalized in this way? Or do you actually have a love for it? And the quick answer to it is I don't think most people who say that they love English or math actually love English or math. I think that they loved being good at something.
Right.
And what they were good at was not really English or math. Right. And so I never had to develop myself that way. Now this is where every homeschool experience is extremely different. You might have a parent or a homeschool co-op with a bunch of different parents and other teachers all collaborating. And in that experience as a homeschool kid, you at least get exposure to somebody who's passionate about something, and maybe you click with them or you don't, and maybe they can kind of unlock that part of your potential or not. In my case, just no across the board. And so I wasn't really good at any of these things. I didn't really care about any of these things. And all I really cared about was getting the homework done as quick as possible so I could get back to having fun, running around, being free. And then now to close it off with the answer to your original question, the superpower is the freedom itself. And the word you used was agency. And that is something that I can do, is I can say, I'm going to do this thing. I'm doing this thing without anybody's permission. I'm doing this thing because I think it needs to happen, and people will eventually get it. And I don't need authority figures or institutions to tell me that it matters or that they're going to help me. I don't have to wait for them to roll out for me a set of deadlines. I don't have to do any of the things. It's absolutely, completely zero institutional oversight. And so I see a thing that needs to happen, I do it, and that's kind of how it's always been.
Oh, that's really helpful. So the sort of the superpower then is that the ability to, one, not need any institutional structural affirmation, guidance, pressure in order to actually express your own desires, to turn them into plans, to realize them. So that kind of person is obviously a very different kind of person than what the school system as a whole is creating. And I know you know a great deal and have taught and written a great deal through Theory Underground about the school system. But how do you go from this sort of feral child, and apparently in a very religious context, to a person working at Amazon, a Marxist, someone who's starting Theory Underground? What's sort of the story there? Did you remain religious? Did you become an atheist? Or were you a religious Marxist? What happened in your journey that led you to becoming the person who you now are as a philosopher?
Right, right. And this would be the perfect time to just put a little signpost. Hopefully, we can come back to that idea of post left. So I'm neither a Marxist nor post left, but my trajectory does go through Marxist and post left to where I now am, which is this mysterious third thing we can come back to. And so, yeah, how did I get here? And yes, atheism was a very important step along the process because there was a time where I really didn't like the way that I was raised. I really didn't like homeschool. I really didn't like living out in the middle of nowhere. And that's because after a few years of being a kid running around having fun, it started to set in on me like, oh, I don't have a lot of options for friends. And I want more friends. I want to have the ability to make and break relationships. You know what I mean? Instead, it was like, I've got my one friend up the street. And at one point, someone else moved into the area. And then that was my other friend. And then he left. And then I was back to my one friend. Now, I love that one friend. He's still in my life, best friend. And that's awesome. But at the same time, in the school scenario, it's like you get to actually make friends and alliances and get into sports and arts and things like that. That as a teenager, I really wanted those experiences. And so, you know, not getting to have them, I was pretty bummed out about the homeschool situation. And my parents, you know, I said that they're first generation parents, right? Or first generation deliberate parents. Another way of saying that is deliberate, holistic, DIY parents. Like we're talking pioneer, homestead, homeschool. They're going to make a lot of mistakes being the first generation. You know, they'll be the first ones to admit what those are. But I'm not going to sit here and talk about what those are. The fact is they made mistakes, but they also did things that nobody else would ever have dreamed of accomplishing in their lives. And so it's a sort of mixed basket. But as a teenager who had a chip on his shoulder already, I was seeing the negative. And just to sum it all up, my chip on the shoulder with religion, especially that I didn't like, was that in this certain vein of evangelical Christianity, especially that was popular at the time, the questioning spirit gets suffocated.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't call that a religious thing. I would call that some specific version of what religion became for our contemporaries here, and I think it persists to this day. Right. So the questioning spirit itself not only gets suffocated, it also gets demonized. It gets seen as dangerous, as potentially satanic. The idea being that what was so bad about Lucifer in the Old Testament, you know, like what really happened there was that he was thinking for himself. He was questioning things. He wasn't obeying. He should have been obeying. And so disobedience is the root of rebellion, and rebellion is the worst vice possible. And so I'm a sort of natural questioner. I always want to know not just how or what, but why. And that got me in a lot of trouble in a situation where questioning and wanting to know why was seen as rebellion, which was seen as bad, right? So that's the basic schema for why I started to have a problem with religion writ large. And so by the time that I was going to college, and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam
Harris.
Thank you, Sam Harris, and the rest of them were on the rise, this kind of scratched that itch I already had. And so I kind of got into it for a little bit. I was the president of the philosophy club that I started at North Idaho College. It got Club of the Year a couple of years in a row. It was a big deal. We had a lot of fun. But the kids in this other club, Campus Alive in Christ, they did not like us because we like to question things. We like to debate. We love to have arguments. And they don't like those things over there. They just sit in a circle and they all tell each other, well, they're all wrong because of these things. Don't talk to them, though. You know, and if you do talk to them, here's the rhetorical tricks you need to play to come out on top. And we were, I think, kind of excited to show that those rhetorical tricks don't have much to them. And so it became like this sensational rift at the campus. While doing that, the fact is it was not an atheist club. It was a club that had many Catholics in it. It had many more intellectually inclined spiritual people. But I did also get in league with the Secular Student Alliance because I wanted to use their funding and I wanted to bring their speakers. And so I was also affiliated with them. We brought some atheists to come talk on campus, and things got really heated for a while. I had somebody on the board of trustees threaten me directly.
Really?
A whole church of...
You're like the Luciferian philosopher from the fundamentalist standpoint.
Yeah, no, and it brought in all these people who would like pray out loud during presentations for speakers we brought. Like they were like, they came in like they thought it was a matter of spiritual warfare, and maybe it was, who knows? But I was having fun. We'll put it that way. I was having fun, and the other thing that kind of goes along with this version of Christianity is a sort of dogmatic love of what they call free markets. And so I say what they call free markets because capitalism and the kinds of policies that they support has very little to do with the reality in which we live, right? And so this free market, more libertarian, capitalistic, Republican, conservative thing was like this bundle against which I found myself opposed, even though I didn't have like a strong commitment to being anti-capitalist. I was just like, well, we should be able to question that, shouldn't we? You know, and that was very upsetting for some people. So upsetting that after that board of trustees guy threatened me, I talked to my vice president over the summer, and we just kept going over it. Like, what would be something that would really get under his skin? Because we just wanted to, we wanted to ruin this board of trustees guy's life after he had threatened us. And I mean, when I say threatened, I don't just mean like threatened to expel us. Like he told me personally that he can call people in and have them drop in and take someone out. Like he was kind of a nut.
Was this a religious college or was it a state college?
It's a secular, it's a normal secular community college.
So you were literally got like your life threatened because of your leadership of the philosophy club and free speech and
yeah.
I'm amazed you're not like a rabid secular humanist still after that experience. It would justify it.
I was for a while, right?
That makes sense.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you wanted to get back at this.
So what I did was we realized, because I'd already done a few years of planning events. We were coming up on close to my final semester. I wanted to do something grand. And, I'd been on the student government. They had taught me how to organize events. And they'd sent me to training and whatnot. And so I knew how to organize. And that means really thinking ahead. And so here we are like 6 months out from the fall semester, and we're brainstorming, what should we do? And the idea was, what if we just do a whole series on Marx? And not just a series on Marx, but have the whole thing be one poster so that we're not constantly having to rip down old posters and put up new posters. One poster, and then we can put extra money into making them especially large posters. How about really, really big posters with Marx's face on them, And so it was like, I think it said something like, love, hate, no. I think we were using love, hate, no, Marx. And the idea was, and then we had like the time, the place, and then it said free pizza, And so the first one of imagine that you're a student, or in this case, that board of trustees member, and you come back to, the fall semester. At this point, because nobody else is thinking that far ahead, really, ever, because there's such a high turnover rate at a 2-year institution, there's no events happening. There's nothing on the bulletin boards. There's nothing except this giant poster of Marx's face. And it's probably 2 times the size of your average poster, just giant Marx poster. And it's like red and orange and like just very stylized, epic. And it says this. And so we had a huge turnout of people curious to see what was going to happen. And it was actually pretty boring. What we had was 3 professors sitting on a table, all of them talking about their different takes on Marx. I thought it was really cool. But the more important thing was that this professor, who I love to this day, he teaches at Gonzaga University. He was a sort of adjunct professor who would drive into Coeur d'Alene and teach at North Idaho College a couple times a week. His name is Bruce Bierman. I arranged with him because I found out he liked Marx. I arranged with him to talk about Marx at several following meetings. And so it's like there was this giant kickoff event, and then it's like every 2 weeks there was like this follow-up lecture from Bruce Bierman. And he gives really engaging talks. He's not just a Marxist, he really likes Kierkegaard, and he really likes Plato and the Epictetus and whatnot. So but he loves his Marx. And so he did this whole series on Marx, and that was where I got Marx pilled. If we're talking about pills that you can take that help you see the matrix, my Marx pill came through not a standard Marxist. He's not a standard Marxist. It was an approach that it's like he likes Heidegger, he likes Kant, he likes Plato, he likes philosophy. He thinks that Marx gives a unique insight into things. And so the kind of Marxist that I would call myself was a kind that was more of a philosopher, not this sort of, oh, we have this immortal science of Marxism. It's answered all of the world's problems. All of the previous Marxist totalitarian regimes were good, actually. None of that. None of that. And it was before there was a real internet presence for such things, in fact. So it was like I felt like I was really just able to read the texts, think about it for myself, thanks to him sort of unlocking them. What I cared about was estranged labor. That's where it really, like, the rubber met the road for me. The idea of alienated labor is sort of the heart and soul of what later becomes time energy theory.
So, that's beautiful. So can you maybe share how time energy then, maybe talk about the idea and how it evolved out of this exposure? Because I would agree, I think I'm struck that your own activity might have been even more dangerous today, given the current crackdown on even the discussion of Marx in universities, which is, I just think, unbelievably stupid. If you can't talk about ideas in universities, then I don't know where you're going to talk about them. But I also, I didn't have the same Marx pilling, but I had it through critical theory, through the Frankfurt School. But alienation was also fascinating for me. So for people maybe who don't know, or who have a vision of Marx, which is, you could say, more economic and less existential. Of course, the economic is the existential. Could you talk about, alienated labor, and then how you see that, like, existentially, how it led to time energy in your work? Because it does seem like I see Theory Underground in your work as a philosopher as being as something that comes out of someone who understood Marx and actually did something useful with it, rather than becoming a kind of groupie or, a member of the kind of cult of Marx, the Church of Heidegger. Which I think is unhelpful, but I don't see any valid framework for critical theory or understanding the economy that doesn't understand the value of Marxist critiques. So maybe you could share how you see that, the alienated labor, and then the trajectory from that to time energy.
Well, in the very beginning, I think one of the things that really helped me was, and it was like this radical epiphany, in fact, was that it's not a binary between either I'm at fault for all the world's problems or it's these other people at fault for all the world's problems. I all of a sudden had like this third option. And so, growing up in I would say relative poverty, right? Growing up in a not always easy situation, there's kind of two paths, and one is blame mom and dad, and the other one is blame yourself. And I was more of a blame mom and dad kind of guy. But of course, I took that out beyond mom and dad. I took it to the religion. I kind of considered it to be their conversion to Christianity that was really the fault of all of our problems. And it was thanks to somebody that they would have never wanted me to read, probably, Marx, that made me realize, like, oh, it's not really them. It's not really their fault. Like, they spend their entire lives working and they have like nothing to show for it. Like, that's the real reason. The real reason that I didn't like my upbringing wasn't because my parents were trying to do some crazy alternative living lifestyle. It's that they were broke, not just broke. They didn't even have the time and energy for us. Right. And so I started thinking in terms of time and energy, thanks to that. And so, like, just a quick speed run of the idea of alienated labor. It's just like if you spend your life working in a factory and you're getting paid the bare minimum, which is this constantly this wage that is always kind of going down in a sort of sense because inflation goes up, but it stays the same, or it actually gets lowered over time as the machines get more and more sophisticated, and the labor, the skilled labor that was required previously is no longer necessary. So now it's as simple as just like moving something from point A to point B. Now even a child can do that, right? That was the idea with industrial society. In that situation, you're no longer an active agent who's making things in the world, who understands the process that goes into making those things, who is then able to trade or sell those things. And then, you have your own, like, I think Adam Smith uses the example of the saddle maker, right? And with the traditional saddle maker, that person, he's making this ornate, beautiful saddle. He gets to make himself an ornate, beautiful saddle too. And then he sells these other ones to other people. He understands every aspect of that process. All of a sudden, what you have in this super sophisticated division of labor that is very efficient and profitable is also just like this sense of being alienated from the knowledge that goes into the process, from the product that is produced in that process. Think of the fact that, Nissan workers in Aguascalientes, Mexico, like they don't have Nissans. They don't get to drive Nissans. Like they're making a car that they don't get to have or drive. So they don't understand the process that goes into it. They don't understand the science, the math, the engineering that goes into it. They couldn't go and make it themselves. They don't even get to drive it. And then they're also alienated from the product of the labor, not just in the sense of like the product being the Nissan, but also if we're thinking about the wage, right? The wage is going to be less than what it would have been, in a different situation where, say, you're a blacksmith, you're going to be making more because you understand all the aspects of that process. And there were guilds that kind of did some kind of price control. So now you're in a situation where you're competing with other workers for lower and lower wages, and those jobs that you're going for are lower skilled. Right. And so that unlocked for me this realization that, my dad, even though he was quite knowledgeable as an appliance repair technician for Sears, formerly Sears and Roebuck, right? Remember Sears? That used to be a thing. Yeah. Well, he was an appliance repair technician. He could go into your home and fix your washer, your dryer, your refrigerator, or whatever. But he didn't have a lot to show for the fact that he was leaving early in the morning before the sun comes up and coming home after the sun had already gone down, which, he's all about family values as an American conservative and an immigrant. He's all about family values. But then he's also super supportive of corporations and of capitalism. And I was sitting here thinking, okay, well, the problem with that, though, is that you're trying your best to be a good first generation immigrant and deliberate parent. But the fact is Sears isn't giving you enough for what you're doing to actually have a dignified life where you can spend real time with your children. And the time that you do have is exhausted time. And so estranged labor kind of gets me thinking in the direction of time energy, but it doesn't quite get me there. It took two other things. One was Heidegger, and the other was another 5 years of organizing and failures in organizing, both to understand time energy in myself, but also to understand it in the people who would come around, who would get involved, who would try to volunteer, who would inevitably burn out and fall off of any organizing endeavor. Those organizing experiences, Heidegger and then Marx with alienation, led me to the understanding that the real issue here is that people, they do have time, they do have energy, but they don't have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time reliably available, right? Like you might have like one big block of time and it's energy infused like in a month. And during that time, you're motivated. And so you say, wow, I could totally pick up this musical instrument and learn it. And so you start trying, but then you're back to the schedule, you're back to the grind. And so, of course, you fall off of that thing because even though you looked at your calendar and you said, yeah, I've got plenty of times throughout the month where I could be practicing my violin perfect. What you're not thinking about is how energy works across that month's calendar. And if you are putting in a lot of extra social, emotional, or physical forms of energy into labor throughout the month, all of a sudden you find yourself, yeah, I've got the time to learn the violin, but I have no energy. I'm totally exhausted. So I think I'm just going to binge Netflix and feel guilty about the fact that I'm doing that instead of playing the violin. Right? And so that's where time energy theory ultimately comes from.
And so people who are interested, you have a book that they can read called Time Energy. And I'm wondering, as a follow-up with that, I mean, what if someone said, yeah, okay, but David, it sounds like you are a classic example of, isn't Marx right? That religion is the opium of the masses, of people who are exhausted. Although, interestingly, the religion caused, it seems like, a change in your socioeconomic condition, or at least your geographical setting. So how do you relate time energy to, say, Marx's critique of religion? How do you think about that today? Like, do you see time energy as, for Marx, religion is in a sense necessary because of this exhaustion, because of alienation, and the prediction is therefore, like in a lot of traditional secularization theory, religion will go away naturally, it'll wither once people have something like what you're calling time energy. Now, it hasn't exactly happened that way, but how do you see Marxist critique of religion and your own work with time energy, and how do you connect it to sort of maybe what you're currently doing when you made Theory Underground? Like, was that part of you trying to respond to the crisis of time energy?
Well, definitely me starting Theory Underground is a response to the crisis of time energy, except that it's a little bit more of a response to my previous 5 years of trying to organize on the left.
Okay, so tell us then, what is Theory Underground, and how then did it connect to that experience in the left? You can share it however you want, but it seems like I want people to understand in a way how innovative what you've been doing is. And I think getting the narrative context is really a beautiful way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let me just go ahead and like bookmark on the religious question, theurgy and hyperstition. I want to kind of come back to theurgy and hyperstition as being things that I don't think that Marx understands. And then we can talk about the ways that I do and also do not agree with his critique of religion. But yeah, setting that aside for now, the way I like to say it is that when you realize the time energy crisis, and like the natural sort of conclusion is that the world needs to change. It's the sort of Marxist, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. That was his 11th thesis on Feuerbach. And I really liked that idea. I was like, yeah, Descartes is quite content to think about these ultimate questions, in his meditations while sitting in a cabin in the woods. And he's trying to think from the ground up, what would be a worldview that, is stripped of all the excess and extra stuff, right? And is actually just like things that we know for sure. But it's very individualistic. It's really from your firsthand experience of like what you know for sure. Whereas this more Marxian approach is what I call large-scale structural change, right? Like large-scale structural change is going to be what's necessary if you want time energy. And for me, I always kind of add on to the definition of time energy that when we say large energy infused, repeatable, reliably available, I'll often add reliably, socially available. It's socially available. It's something that can be taken for granted in a society of people. If it's not, then all of these talents that you are otherwise able to technically, theoretically, hypothetically discover and cultivate in yourself are done without tutelage, are done without inspirational others. And so I think that's one thing that a lot of people maybe take for granted if they haven't had a similar experience that, to me, but me not meeting anybody who is passionate about a subject matter until college, I could definitely say that there are dormant talents that exist within us that only really get ignited because you come in contact with people who inspire you. And they inspire you because they have a love for something and they spent their life going deeper into it. And so time energy without the ability to discover and cultivate talent through tutelage is really going to just be extra time that goes towards video gaming. You know, it's and nothing against video gaming, but it does tend to eat up people's free time, which doesn't really require the kind of energy that reading a book requires. Like, it's a different kind of energy. And if you spend your whole life working a job or going to school and then playing video games in the interstices of that life when you're not sleeping, what you're missing is the experience of that kind of active leisure time that they call it skole. Skole is the root word. It's a Greek word. It's the root for school, scholastic, and scholarly. And it means active leisure. And active leisure is not the same thing as a passive, interpassive, or pseudo-active form of activity. And I would say that, you know, like activities like video gaming, shopping online, binging on a streaming platform, all of those are either passive, interpassive, or pseudo-active forms of activity. I don't have to explain what those words mean right now. They all do mean different things. But basically, we're just talking about a form of activity that is not the kind that requires active leisure. And so when nobody has time energy, what steps in to fill the void is this sort of simulation of achievement or of doing something, when in reality, you're not really doing much of anything, right? Okay, but large-scale structural change and Marx, you know, it makes you realize the world needs to change, right? But once you start thinking that the world needs to change, you go, okay, well, what are the avenues towards change? And activism obviously comes to mind as a way that regular people can get involved in what they call politics. And so it's like, activism. It's a way that we, the little people, can have some kind of an influence on the bigger political establishment or institutions, or perhaps grow a movement that can, you know, go beyond those institutions. And so that's something that I think every American has deeply instilled in their heart, is like this idea that we can, by going out on the street and protesting, ultimately change things. Right. And so that was something that I was thinking about. At the same time, I was beginning to see myself as working class. Right. If you had asked me, are you working class? Before I went to college, I would have thought to myself, well, I'm working, so of course I'm working class. But I wouldn't have thought any deeper about it. But then, of course, with Marx, you start thinking in terms of class warfare. And of course, like the scene at the time was like, it's all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there's very rarely any talk of class. And so people, you know, the fact that I grew up in poverty without any of these institutional supports, that doesn't even clock on people's radar when they're thinking about privilege calculus and whatnot. And so the moment I'm reading about this Marx stuff, I'm like, oh, I'm working class. My parents are working class. We're like first generation immigrant working class people. This is big. And so at the level of my identity, I felt so spoken to by Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders was like the first guy in American politics that I had ever seen say, it's about the working class. It's about lifting up the working class. The working class is what matters. And I was like, yes. So I was into Bernie, but primarily because I had these Marxist priors that already meant something to me. I was like, wow, he's talking to the working class. Without the working class beginning to see itself as a class and going from being in itself to for itself, to use the language they like to use, we're never going to be able to move towards a society that would have time energy. And so I got involved with politics at that level. And it was my experiences in activism, I would say primarily at the time, that led to a lot of the disillusionment that compiled with two other forms of disillusion. And so I would say that there's really like this period of absolute burnout in 2020 when I was like, there's no hope through existing avenues, whether that be institutions or grassroots movements. All of them are co-opted. All of them are captured. All of this is leading to nowhere. Activism is screwed. The academia is screwed. The attention economy is screwed. There's no avenue forward on any of these three things. And where they all intersect, there's really no way forward, especially because the crises of each one of these all coalesce in the sort of center of a Venn diagram. I call it the three A's, right? And so those three A's being academia, activism, attention economy. And so I was involved with all three. I had just gotten my master's degree. I had just, at that point, I think I had between 3,000 and 4,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. I was actively making leftist influencer sort of content while at the same time knocking on doors and making phone calls for Bernie. And it was the sort of realization this is going nowhere that came from a lot of personal experiences, but also these bigger issues like watching Dr. Adolph Reed Jr. get canceled by the Democratic Socialists of America, or watching their convention devolve into really comical spectacle that was easy to just see. Like, there's no future in this organization that I had been a big part of. I'd started a chapter of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, in Boise. Right. I'd founded this chapter because I thought, this would be a really good way of building up the local Bernie base. And instead, what I saw was it devolved into extremely divisive, insular programs and slogans that they feel like they're made up just to alienate people. Like it feels like some people sit in a room and they do focus grouping where they're like, what's the slogan that would be the most polarizing, the most alienating, the most divisive? And then they sit here and they run people through, and then they refine it to be the worst possible slogan imaginable. And then you have a person who comes in and their entire identity is like curated around that slogan. And it's like, how are we supposed to deal with this? This is not how it was in 2016. So there I am, 2020, absolute burnout. And I was like looking around and I thought, what we really need is like a post-left theory school. What we really need is a place for people who are facing this kind of burnout, who want to go deeper into the literature. But instead, there's a couple podcasts where some people identify as post-left, and there was really nothing. There was really nothing rigorous, nothing theoretical. And I was just like, man, this sucks. And so I kind of quit everything. I quit the activism, I quit academia, and I also quit my influencer attention economy gig. I literally shut down my Patreon. I said goodbye to everybody. Thank you, but I can't do this anymore. And I chose to go work at Amazon because I knew that Amazon was the one place that I could work where I could be experimenting with new forms of labor, automation, the future of work, while at the same time listening to books. And I didn't have to feel any of the entrapments of academia, the attention economy, or the activist world. So it's like it was this one place where you would think it's the opposite of freedom, but it felt like freedom compared to the forms of capture I had been experiencing in the three crises.
I love this. So it's like how your experience as a Bernie activist led you to voluntarily go work in an Amazon factory. So, I mean, I want to definitely follow up on what Theory Underground became from that sort of journey into, okay, we need a place for the post-left, for burned out people who understand this isn't working. In a way, it was clear you were prescient. But what's funny is we can take two hypotheses, because I want to sort of pitch a contemporary question and get back into your narrative, which is, Mamdani just, became the mayor. He, with a very significant lead in his win. And so this is now 5-6 years after you burned out of the Democratic Socialists of America, of the Bernie world. Were you wrong? Or is it there's something that people are now, they're just starting to go down a path and where it ends? And if you think that's what the case is, explain to people, why is Mamdani so popular and what do you think is going to happen? And how do you relate it to your own experience? Because I think this is we have a great chance to ask David McKerracher, Theory Underground, what's going on here? And because I know we're not interested in partisan politics. What we are interested in is deep analysis, which is one of the things I love that you do really well at Theory Underground. You integrate all the philosophy and the relevant social science. So what do you think is going on that as you've moved out of this world 6 years after, you now get a Democratic socialist as the mayor of New York City?
Yeah, man. I think that there would have been a time where I got really excited about his election for sure. Now I know I still have leftist friends. I have socialist friends. I have not fully burned those bridges despite my best efforts. I still have friends who are leftists. And And most of them don't like Mamdani for their own reasons. I'm not going to sit here and talk about their reasons. I'll just talk about my own reasons. And I'm going to just say, I think Mamdani is captured in the worst possible ways, even though I think he's successful because he is speaking to real needs. He is attractive, charismatic, funny, young. He definitely feels like what people were asking for at the point that identity politics became a lot more popular after 2016 with Bernie's first run. There were still always those people who were like, well, he's a bit old, he's a bit white, you know? And so it's like Mamdani's like a nice, young, not white version of Bernie. And so like it's almost like he gets to speak to those people or for those people, while at the same time hitting on these sort of economically left populist kinds of themes. And I think that what works best for him is the fact that I think he's the kind of guy who could sit down like Bernie and have a conversation with my parents who are conservative, and he could agree with them on a lot of things, and he could see where they're coming from, and he could agree to disagree on certain things, and then he could make a case and he could actually present it, and he could do so without preaching to the choir the whole time, right? That's something that is very special about him. And, it's a rare trait in a politician these days for a person like Bernie to be able to go on to a Fox News town hall and get so much applause from the audience. If anybody hasn't seen that, like, you got to go watch it. It's absolutely amazing. It's a master class in how from the left you can speak to the right. And Mamdani, I would say, at his best, is able to do that. But then there's the fact that I do think he's ultimately captured. And what I mean by that is there's all kinds of capture, right? And to a certain extent, it's inevitable. And of course, when people think about politics and capture, often they're going to think about like, yeah, well, you've got your contingency in air quotes, and then you've got like your real contingencies being whoever you've got to work with in terms of lobbying, in terms of dark money, I'm not talking about these forms of capture. These have always been present. These have never gone away. What is new, though, is what I call duopoly extremism. And so duopoly extremism is something that only really comes about in our lifetime, Samuel. No one else ever had to experience it the way that we've had to experience it, because nobody else had the media conditions or the post-World War II conditions. So it's like our historical contingency is where we find ourselves thrown into a world, so to speak, where the medium is the internet. It is the conglomeration and synthesis of all previous media forms, from the written word to the radio and the television. And of course, you write about this in very well in Underground Theory Volume 1. Right, you've got an amazing,
which is a great book
take
with Zizek in it. Thank you, David, for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, man, your piece in there really does kind of tell like this very zoomed out but also rigorous sort of epic of the media form and its development from the beginning of writing to where we find ourselves today. And so I don't think there's anyone in the world who might get it more than you when I'm talking about the medium and what it means to find ourselves in this situation. But what's, just for the listener who's maybe not as accustomed to thinking about critical media theory, the fact is like any good theory, critical media theory can easily start out with common sense intuitions. And so we do have common sense intuitions today, like, oh, people are so on their phones, they're all in echo chambers, they're being cherry-fed information, it's all very sensational, it's trying to rage bait them, people are becoming audience influencers become audience captured, and then, the audiences become algorithm captured, it becomes this crazy feedback loop. I would say that all of that is something where, like, 80% of the people in my life, if I said those words, or some variant of those words, like, they're going to nod their heads and go, well, yeah, duh, you're not really saying anything that we have never thought of. And that's correct. Critical media theory starts from there and then goes deeper. into like how the medium is the message, to put it the way that McLuhan would, which is to say, it's not about the content, it's about the form of life in a sort of sense, like how the medium becomes this mediating presence that actually has a change in your sensory apparatus, in your what's the word? It becomes an actual extension of your nervous system, right? And so the way that Neil Postman, who's a student of McLuhan, talks about it in his Amusing Ourselves to Death, but as well as in a lot of his other works. He's a really great professor who I love a lot. He's passed away, sadly. I never got a chance to meet him. But what Neil Postman says is that a literate society that's based on the word, in the text form, what matters is the semantic content. Whereas with audio visual technology like television or reels on your phone, it's not about semantic meaning, it's about your reactive impression at the level of your just actual feelings, like your gut sense. And so it's impressions as opposed to signification. And so, that's all I'll say for now about the medium. Post World War II, what was unique about America in the age of television was there's a consensus, and the United States was this new leader in the world, and there was this consensus between the two parties. They would argue, they had lots of arguments, but there was this post World War II consensus that was really secured by the continued existence of the Soviet Union. It made for this neoliberal world order that the two sides of the political establishment in the United States were basically able to agree on. And that was the era of what Noam Chomsky called manufacturing consent, where it's like, the idea is like, we're going to present to you on television the two sides. And then from those two sides talking to each other, and mostly doing so in reasonable terms, you're going to see what the issue is, and then you'll take your own side. Of course, what goes unsaid usually are going to be all the things that they agree upon. And Chomsky's really good for like laying out the filters that are sort of not visible when you're watching this. The filters might be, one among many would be the corporate interests, right? So it's like someone whose opinion runs counter to the corporate status quo isn't going to be found representing one of those two sides, right? So that's one example of a filter. Chomsky goes through all these other filters. What's unique in the age of duopoly extremism, though, is that we're sort of post-Soviet threat, now finding ourselves, yes, it's a two-party system in the sense of a duopoly, where the monopoly on power has found it advantageous to split into a two-sided duopoly. That's redundant to say two-sided and duopoly. A two-sided monopoly is a duopoly. That's how I meant to say that. Jean Baudrillard was the first person to really get me thinking in the terms of a duopoly. Though I was already thinking about this prior to going to college, I was thinking, wow, it really seems like these two sides, neither one really has any serious future for us. Neither side really is able to put forward a future that makes any kind of sense, given how much new technology is at our disposal, considering how much the relations of production have changed in the economy. Like, you would think that someone would be capable of stepping forward and saying, all right, America, I've got a new vision for where we're going as a species. Let me lay it out for you. And instead, they're acting like we're at the end of history. So that was the duopoly of yesteryear. Now we find ourselves in duopoly extremism. It's the time that Matt Taibbi calls Hate Inc. in his book by that name. Hate Inc. is where you're constantly being bombarded, depending on your sort of base disposition, or maybe the people that you associate with, images of the other side being the worst possible kind of people. So whether you're on the left or the right, you're fed this constant diet of how bad the other side is. And all of this to trump up this image of them being the worst evil, so that your side is the lesser evil, so that then it's justified to do anything, because when the other side is Hitler, you're justified to do anything, right? Anything is justified if the other side is the worst possible thing. And so that's duopoly extremism. That's where we find ourselves today. And I do think that though Mondani is quite capable of speaking to regular Trump supporters, for instance, in his own neighborhood, like he could sit down and have a good conversation with them, he still, in order to be this guy who has the support of the DSA, has to check a litany of boxes on 1,000 different issues. And many of those issues are, like I said, inherently divisive, alienating, extremely complicated, and the activism likes to oversimplify them. And so, socialism always has to have mass support to work, and it has never really had that mass support for very long, because the people who get involved as professional revolutionaries tend to have like their own super niche takes on everything. For instance, like think Soviet Russia and how they were like killing priests, like burning down temples. They're like, oh, this is so last year, we could just burn down the whole thing, throw out all religion. We'll kill this priest. And of course the peasantry is going to love us because they were being oppressed by this priest. And it's like, well, even if somebody had a problem with that priest, even if they were being oppressed by it, chances are they're not going to love you coming in and like burning that person. Like, it creates a lot of resentment. And the same thing is true with like parents. Parents can be very oppressive as well. But if you're coming in with programs that divest those parents of any sort of agency in their families and try to sub it all out to state-run daycares, for instance, it's going to be an anti-popular approach, right? So I'm not saying that there's not potential good things there, and that this is just a repeat of something from 2016 or 2020. I think there's all kinds of new potential, and that people who hate Mamdani tend to not think about like what's potentially there. But in terms of capture, I think that he has to, at the end of the day, represent the most niche side of something that was already niche and divisive, which was the left side of the political duopoly.
That makes sense. So it doesn't matter what good there is. Ultimately, if you have that capture structure, you get a kind of increasing extremism, which is just going to cause minimally political problems. You'll lose your base. People will be upset at you. So what is your own solution to that? I mean, for people who don't know what, for example, happens in Theory Underground, could you give a brief overview of what Theory Underground has been and what it does, but then also like where you're taking it and how you see philosophy today? Particularly, I always like to ask this question as we come to the middle or ending part of the show, which is like, what do you think a human is? So maybe explain Theory Underground, but then also tackle the question, for David McKerracher as a philosopher, as someone who's now a husband and is going to become a dad, what is a human being? And what do you think humans are becoming? How do you see what is the alternative to a duopoly extremist world in which both political parties are not serious, in your view, about giving us a future? What is the human future going to look like? How is your work, creating a path to that future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, what is the human? Obviously, that's what we want to become at the Becoming Human Project. And so that's something that I have always really loved about your work. And my base sense is that the human is it's a potential. Another way of saying it is that we are the being who is virtually purposive, meaning that we are defined by the ends that we serve. The ends that we serve define everything. And if you are a secular humanist and you don't think too deeply about teleology, for instance, chances are commodity production and consumption sneaks in, and that's actually what the end that is ruling your life, right? I can describe my 20s and still a good portion of my 30s as being something that was still defined by the production of commodities, all seen as done for the wage which was done for rent, but ultimately for my own identity curation through commodity consumption. This is the era of capital in which we live. It's the consumer phase. Meaning that for Marx and guys like Lenin, it was easy for workers to see themselves as fundamentally workers. Like, we're not the bourgeoisie, they're the business owners. No, we're like the working class, and that's what has us all sort of on the same level here. But instead, people do not see themselves primarily as a proletarian force. People see themselves as consumers. But what kind of consumers? Niche, boutique consumers, right? Now, we might all have some commonalities at the level of consumption. Maybe we both would say that as far as like pretty cheap and fast food, that it's still pretty good would be like Chipotle. And we go, yeah, Chipotle is pretty good, actually. That's not bad at all. And then we have some other things that we like. Oh, you know what? Like this shoe brand is like a really quality shoe brand. And so we have our things that we can agree on, and we can like learn from each other when we talk about those things. And we go, yeah, that's great. But in the situation wherein we find ourselves, that I like to refer to as the PCFM, the post-class fractured mass, the situation is one of identities being informed primarily by their niches. And so for me, it becomes very important for us to be able to speak across those niches or beyond those niches. We have to be able to find ways of relating to other people, not just in our own little niche. And one form of capture that I've discovered, obviously doing theory, is like, yeah, you find yourself only talking to people who take a lot of theoretical priors for granted and use a lot of jargon. It's not really jargon, it's insider baseball. Like, you're really just talking to people who've done the work. And so it's not a big deal. But if that's your primary way of socializing, you do sort of lose contact with other people and the ability to talk to other people without alienating them. So I've had a variety of ways of addressing that over the course of the last 5 years. And in my first book, Waypoint, I said, look, the fact is I'm through getting my master's, losing touch with just being able to speak in a normal way. And I'm very aware of that because I go home all the time and I associate with my old friends and everything like that. And I'm able to see, like, you can't talk like this. And so, like, I said, I want to write a book that I'm not really capable of writing right now, because there's a lot of theoretical stuff I have to work through. I'm not trying to do that work because I'm trying to secure some kind of a career in academia. So it's not like I have to do it in a certain way to talk to peers in academia. At the same time, I can't write that book in the popular register because it's like theoretical work that I have to do, right? And so what am I going to do? How will I approach this? Well, I'm going to give myself, this is what I said, 5 years to just stop worrying about speaking to an audience of academic peers or to the populace, whatever that's supposed to be, right? And instead, I'm going to spend that 5 years really just talking to myself and my fellow travelers, the people who are kind of already in my network. And this book is for them. That's why it's Waypoint. It's on a journey. It's just a waypoint along my journey. And it's a way of touching base with other people who are on their own journeys. And maybe we all find ourselves beside some figurative fire out in the mountains, and we're all kind of warming ourselves. And I'm like, well, this is where I'm at today. And that's what Waypoint was all about. And in it, I said, I'm going to give myself 5 years to have that mentality, and then I'll write a different book later. Well, giving myself that time, it taught me something. And that's that, if we don't give ourselves time, then we'll never have it. Right? And everything is telling us that we don't have time. And what I said then was that my experiences as an activist, especially as someone on the education committee of a chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, was that everyone's always saying, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for education. We don't have time for theory. And That's because the world is burning and climate change and oppression and everything. We don't have time for this. And I said, well, if that's true, then we really don't have time to act like we don't have time. Right? If we don't have time, then we really don't have time to act like we don't have time, because that's the essence of immaturity. It's like, oh, we never have time. We never have time. We can never actually plan anything. And so I said a countermeasure against that mentality is, for me, the idea that these next 5 years will be spent developing myself to then speak to the parents of the children who will be 25 in 30 years. Meaning, by the way, now that it's 5 years later, meaning people who are coming into deliberate parenting right now. Like, that's where I'm at now, is the desire to move beyond what Theory Underground was doing, while retaining what I'm doing with Theory Underground. I want to also begin to speak to people who are trying to become deliberate parents and live a more holistic and philosophical life. So to sum up what Theory Underground is or became, and then kind of where I'm going right now, and we can go more into it, but I'll just give like the short elevator pitch version of it right now, is that Theory Underground did become that sort of post-left theory school that I wished existed in 2020. I kicked it off during the launch date of Theory Underground was December 6, 2022. And so it's been around for a little while at this point. And I think that the catalog of past courses and seminars is exactly what I wanted in 2020. And it's something that I've been able to give myself as an education at the same time as sort of paying it forward to other people who have similar needs. And I describe that audience as being workers with earbuds. And it's not just any kind of workers with earbuds. It's specifically the kind of workers with earbuds who are getting into big ideas, who are looking for something more rigorous and long form. So this is the absolute opposite of what I call the pseudo-populist approach that tries to keep everything super condensed for workers. I hate that. It's like, oh, workers, they want everything really, really condensed because they don't have time. It's like, what are you talking about? All the kinds of workers I could possibly think of are the kinds of workers who listen to stuff for 8 hours a day. Like, these are people who crave long form content. Why do you think Joe Rogan and Lex Fridman are so popular? They're so popular because they do long form interviews, and workers desire serious conversations, not the kind where it's like, hey, welcome to my show. Let's talk about something for 5 seconds. Okay, goodbye. No, it's more like, hey, like let's really get to know you. So the demand is obviously there. But in activist and academic going, popular on the internet kind of circles, a lot of the time, the assumption is that it's the opposite. And I ran into, I'll just kind of close this out with an example. I was interviewing a former Black Panther activist named Gerald on the West Coast. He's a really big time activist in the Bay Area. So we drove to Oakland and we interviewed him, and we got like 5 hours of interviews with him. But something that was a constant theme was he was always busting me up, giving me all this grief for the long form content, saying, that's not what the workers want. That's not what the workers need. What the workers want are like these short little, snippets. And of course, he's coming from a generation of radio, right? And so that's kind of, he's been on the radio. He's talked to huge audiences, and that's what he's thinking about. And I was always trying to convince him that, there's this other kind of audience of people who have that time. And then one time I just went into it with him. I could start laying out the kinds of working class spaces that I've been in as a person who was stocking shelves at a grocery store, working in construction, working in the back kitchen at Olive Garden, making sandwiches, delivering pizza, like all these kinds of things that I've done. And he goes, because my old influencer name was Theory Plebe, and so he would always call me Plebe. He goes, Plebe, those are inferior human resources. I'm talking about the advanced working class, the advanced workers. He goes, I'm talking about the proletariat, the advanced proletariat. You're talking about inferior human resources. And, this was a constant provocation from him. What I want to say is, I've thought a lot about that. I think that might have been the situation back in Lenin's time, maybe even in the 1960s, But what we find ourselves in today is where if you're talking about intellectually sharp, inquisitive minds who really care about understanding things in serious conversations, big ideas and rigorous thinking, those are going to be what used to be inferior human resources. But now the sort of intellectual vanguard of the working class is arising from the shop floor at the actual Amazon warehouse. It's the person who's stocking the robots up with the products that arrive at your house. It's the person who drives up to your house. They have an earbud in their ear. They listen for 8 to 12 hours a day. That person has an appetite, a hunger, and an ability that was not present in the working class prior to the development of what I call the audio listening revolution. So I say there's a new kind of working class demographic that I've been a part of, that I've been pioneering, that I've been speaking to, that I've been interpolating, that I've been saying, like, we're a new thing. We have to do this. We have to take advantage of what's being afforded by this technology. Let's go. And that's what Theory Underground has been serving, is like specifically the audio listening revolution and the wing of it that is theoretical. So the pipeline goes from Joe Rogan into big ideas, maybe with some Rick Roderick and Slavoj Zizek along the way, and then eventually is listening to primary philosophical and theoretical texts, or going to your Plato seminar that's going all year long and listening while working. Those kinds of people aren't going away. I think they're only going to go up in number. But at the same time, the future here, the direction that I'm going, is going to say it's not just workers with earbuds. I think that workers with earbuds are going to serve the people who are deliberate parents. And so like that's the big move here as we move into 2026.
Well, it's extremely exciting, Dave, because I think this is something we both share. I think the first episode of the second season of Becoming Human, I call it the oral age. And I also, our shared interest in media theory obviously is part of what brought us together. And you seeing this, has really affirmed in your success in doing it, commercially, having so many students, having so many high profile people that you've interviewed that have supported your work, like Zizek endorsing Timenergy. It showed something that I still think basically mainstream media, which, let's face it, doesn't exist anymore. I honestly think we are the new mainstream media. We're a smaller end of it, but as you said, it's the vanguard. Everyone ends up in philosophy. That's why I predicted, in the beginning when I released Becoming Human March 11, 2020, the last episode essentially argued we're entering into an age in which everyone is going to become a philosopher. Becoming Human is the project. And now you see, of course, it's always co-opted and branded, but that's not going to work. The effect of people, in my view, in mainstream so-called media, making philosophy sexy, which is to say they're adopting the trends of you and I. And that to me is a beautiful irony that like the actual so-called intellectual classes are downstream of trends of workers with earbuds. There is something so divine in that inversion that the people who are listening to Marx, who are doing philosophy, you and I both knew. I remember hearing people say, well, video should be 5 minutes. And I was like, what the hell? I was like, why? The most popular podcast at 3 hours. And they're like, well, and I call that the coastal consensus. It's like, well, this is why media is dying. Because and it's an irony, right? Wealthy people with leisure have no attention relative to working class people or people with our kind of background for whatever reason. It's an interesting thing. In a way, I think we could do a whole episode on that. And so that I think is one of the real gems of what you've done is people can say, well, like, yeah, well, how do you know there's an audience? I'd be like, have you heard of Theory Underground? Like, do you understand how serious people are? It's like you can find videos of my friend David reading, a book together for like 4 hours. They'll just stand in New York City and read books. People are like, oh, education's dead. It's like, no, this stupid system of education that won't listen to anyone criticizing it. Yes, of course that's going to die. If it weren't propped up by an enormous amount of, unionized power, it would have already been reformed. I'm not against the reforms, but I think the future's already here. It's here in what you're doing. So in the last part of this, let's just talk about then this beautiful transition to what's a pretty big move. Theory is by nature, for those who are listening, like, what the hell is theory? It's like, it's all the hard philosophy stuff that you might not think you're into. It's Karl Marx, it's Slavoj Zizek, it's philosophy.
It's Immanuel Kant.
Immanuel Kant, but it's specifically a lot of, French and German, post-World War II theory, a lot of postmodernism. So it seems the most niche thing. And now you're like, and I want to make it available to like deliberate parents. So clue us in on what a deliberate parent is. You can talk maybe about the new course you've launched on the philosophy of how home economics. I'm going to be teaching in Theory Underground with you, partnering to do a philosophy of religion course. But yeah, what is a deliberate parent, and how are you making this transition from, in a way, the most niche, you could say, arguably somewhat demographically gendered, theory world to I want to reach parents, because that's a great market shift. I'm all about it. I support it. So how are you seeing that happening, and what are you doing proactively to make the shift from kind of the incredible niche world of theory with its inner baseball philosophy language to something that I guess is going to be a lot more, in a way, I guess, have a lot more entry points for people to come into it from different class backgrounds. In a sense, you're going up the class ladder. You're like, the most rigorous intellectual part was the working class. Now to try to make it more accessible to middle class and other people. How do we dumb it down for the middle classes is kind of an irony. It's not really dumbing it down, but how do you see this transformation that you're going through?
No, 100%. Now, I mean, first of all, there are, moms and alienated teachers and parents who listen to Theory Underground, but they don't tend to have the same kind of capacity for attending the live side. And so the Zoom calls that we do for members only are rarely representative of that side of my base. And they do exist, but there's something, especially with the moms, when I was traveling, got to actually see what it looks like. We're talking about very busy people who are kind of all over the place. They're trying to chase little kids around and feed them and keep them on their homework and doing all this kind of stuff. And so and then when we're thinking about not homeschool, but public school teachers, maybe it's like that one teacher, it's the only teacher who brings a book till the lunch hour and who reads during the lunch hour, and everybody else just sits there and talks about celebrities or whatever. Like that, I hear reports from these people all the time. I've got, there's a lot of alienated teachers who are into Theory Underground, is what I'm trying to say. They're not the same demographic as my primary demographic with Theory Underground. So you're exactly right, because they don't have the same attention span capacities. It's about their material conditions. It's about their form of life. It's about their responsibilities, and they still need stuff. And so it's not just about content. It's also about community support. And for me, the calling part of it is that someone who feels that way, whether it be that alienated public school teacher who is the only person who reads out of the whole teaching staff, or if it's the alienated homeschool mom who's lost all inspiration for doing what she's doing, who just looks at her phone when she's able to. What I'm interested in is uplifting, edifying, and inspiring those people. And I know that like something that can kind of come out of the theory scene is a sort of disparaging, denigrating, sneering, reaction to anything that seems uplifting or edifying. In fact, edification itself is, made fun of by Hegel, right? And it's like, yeah, well, that's fine, but there's also just the fact that we need to live, and edification. Really, what we're talking about is like helping remind us like why we're here and what we're doing. Like we do need reminders. And to some extent, I address this in my marginalia piece, we are to some extent what we tell ourselves, and then also who we associate with, and then bringing it back to being virtually purposive beings. It's the end that orients us. It's the end that we're directed towards that gives our life its meaning. And advertising agencies know this. They have no problem at all constantly trying to show you who you are or what you want. And the way to reverse that and take some kind of agency is to put serious time, energy, attention, and money towards what we actually care about. and orienting ourselves with what we care about, surrounding ourselves with what we care about. Like the vision board is the first step. Beyond the vision board, you should be reverse advertising, engineering your entire property. Everywhere you should be putting reminders of the things that you love, the things that inspire you, the things that uplift you. And so, you think of live, love, laugh. People put that up and it's kitsch. It's like, oh, that's fine. People put up pictures of their kids and their families, and that's actually precious, and that's a good idea. I'm talking about going way beyond that, though, in the sense that, like, a sort of basic way of saying this would be, think about the fact that most of the delicious looking food things you see in your life that are being pushed at you all the time are from these fast food places, or maybe from a nicer restaurant. But you know how to make some delicious food. Do you have pictures of that delicious food being advertised towards yourself in your actual kitchen? I think every kitchen should have a giant menu board the way that you see when you walk into a fast food establishment. You should be able to walk in and see your own favorite foods that you are able to make, or that someone in your family is able to make. You see them, you're reminded of them, and it's like, oh yeah, we do make a really good curry in this family. I'd like to have that this Friday. And that's what I mean by like reverse engineering the advertising thing, because we are virtually purposive beings. So bringing it back to uplift and edification and inspiration, the idea is like, I see Theory Underground as being the same thing it's always been, but more of it. But then me also embracing another meaning of TU, the initials of Theory Underground, which will remain Theory Underground. But I also think, like on the slide, it means tend and uplift.
Oh,
right.
I love that.
And so, yeah. So like it's the crypto tend and uplift approach to theory. So it's like, yes, critical theory, but if your whole thing is like misanthropic, depressive, Adorno / Sartre, like very like dark, it's a very dark approach to theory. Like, yeah, you're not going to like it. You go have fun somewhere else. The fact is like, this is like a place to remember like why we do this, why we live, what we're, and so I think that serves this demographic, but it also obviously serves those working class people who, listening to big ideas and getting into all this stuff, can go down a pipeline that leads them into deeper depression and misanthropy. That's a form of capture too.
Yeah, it's such a powerful and beautiful thing that you're saying and that you're doing. One of my favorite short courses I made that's part of the Becoming Human member package is on food. And in a way, I need to advertise it more and do other work, because I think, I've always loved food. I'm very hobbity, and I love this idea. Have you done that in your own kitchen? Like, do you have the pictures? Or
I've been talking to Anne about it for like 3 years now.
Okay, well, when you do it, you got to send me pictures, and I could share it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful idea, and I think you're right. And it's not knocking it. I mean, I was turned to philosophy like many people do, Jean-Paul Sartre, and you could say the kind of black turtleneck, cigarette, and cafe life. It's great. I love it, but it's also, sunshine is a good thing. Life is a good thing, and there is something in it. I've always hated this, and I've I don't want to say I've run afoul of it, but I had friends when I was in undergrad in a religious institution. Then I went to Yale Divinity School, which is religious, but in a totally opposite way. And I did see there was always this sense of like being cool and edgy means you hate life. And I was just like, I'm sorry, but fuck that. Like, I think the valorization of misanthropy and like philosophy and theory worlds is something to do with like a very dark undercurrent of like, okay, you're like a pretty unhappy guy right now. That's totally fine, because this theory stuff is the best thing. It's not the problem. But I think that what you're doing in having all of that rigor and having all of that theory, but also being like, yeah, we're pro natality, we're pro in that broad sense, like we are affirming of the goodness of life, right? This to me is if you're going to put a label, it's silly to put one, but it's like the Platonic undercurrent of all philosophy. What is, insofar as it's truly understood, is good and it's desirable, and therefore it's worthy of praise. Like, there's so little philosophy of praise, right? Kierkegaard, of course, talks about edification, no doubt partly as a thumb in the eye to that Hegelian, snideness towards his earlier pietistic idea that he could enlighten the world, as a popular philosopher. And, I love Hegel, and I admit the esoteric dimensions of philosophy, but I love that you are actually embracing those and just sublating them, continuing it into the next phase of evolution. So just in the last couple
Exactly.
minutes, is there any sort of thoughts you would want to leave people with? This is sort of what I think I wish everyone could know, like about philosophy or about theory underground, or maybe just a message you want to share with people who, if we were going to imagine, okay, David McKerracher is giving your sort of homily, 3 minutes for the day or whatever. What is the message that you have? What is something you're excited about or that you think, the people, anyone who's listening to this, it's like, this is what I wish, you could know. If we were in person and you asked me what's something really important that you've learned, I've spent 2 hours listening to you. I'm fascinated, but I would like your, not TLDR, but what is
Right.
edifying to you today? What do you want to tell people?
Ooh. Yeah. Well, I think I could kind of tie it all up nicely by saying, critical theory pills are important. There's two kinds of critical theory. The first is the kind that tries to change the world. The other is the kind that says that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And so, I like to say like Lenin on the one side, Adorno on the other. That would be the two kinds of critical theory. And then I just would say, like, regardless of the two kinds that you're taking, or maybe you're taking a mixed diet of the two, you got to balance it out with wholesome theory. And so the way that wholesome theory, as I've described it, relates to all of this is like holistic living and trying to figure out what are the ways of getting grounded. What are the ways that we can touch grass beyond just literally touching grass? Walking in nature, taking your feet off on the ground, getting into your breath, eating good food, learning how to grow food, doing something that's dangerous or risky every once in a while, going out on a limb and actually, I don't know, uh, going into your local jujitsu gym and trying it out. You know what I mean? Like these ways of like challenging ourselves, uh, those are all very important. And I think part of a holistic life. I really like the part of Xenophon's Oikonomicus when they're talking about Cyrus, the king of Persia, and Socrates is like, yeah, I heard that he really likes, it's war and farming are the two most important things, and that he never goes in for dinner unless he's challenged himself with one of the two beforehand. He always likes to work up a sweat, either play fighting, actually training for war games, or on the other side, he's actually been planting trees in his orchard, and that's a noble thing. And Socrates says that it might be the most important thing, farming. And in that sense, I want to develop the idea of farming as one of the liberal arts. It's a liberating art, meaning that once liberated from drudgery and from economic necessity, this is something that you do as a part of a holistic life. And so what deliberate parenting means to me is like you're trying to give your kids a more holistic life and you're having kids on purpose. Now, if you already had kids and you had them by accident, it's not too late to become a deliberate parent. But obviously, like, I'm a deliberate parent in the sense of like, I was anti having children for a long time. And now I'm like, I think it's an important part of a life. If it can work for you, go for it. If it doesn't work for you, well, you can at least connect with intergenerationality by supporting the parents around you and getting to know communities, whether it be churches or tabernacles or, mosques or what have you. Like there's a way that you can get involved with local intergenerational community. And that's one big form of grounding for a holistic life. And so wholesome theory goes with critical theory. At Theory Underground, that's the philosophy of stewardship and home economics seminar that is all year long. And it's something that I'm really, really excited about. And then I'll close out by saying, I don't know when you're going to be releasing this, but right now I've been working on a super secret project for almost 200 days. And it's something that I've been thinking about for years and years as one of the potential ways of building bridges between people who are in the niches, not just of the post-class fractured mass, but also of the liberal arts. And so if you are in the liberal arts and you're really into Shakespeare, or you're really into Hegel, or you're really into Plato, whatever it is, there should be a fun way of reframing your relation to other people who are also, if not super invested in other niches of the liberal arts, then potentially into, I would say, curious about getting more into the liberal arts. So my brother who works at a lumber mill, I would say he's liberal arts curious in the sense that, yeah, he doesn't want to go to college, but he's interested in history. Well, we should have a way to relate to those people that's not the traditional lecture arrangement, but it's also not the 1960s reaction to that lecture arrangement, which is the flipped classroom. There's got to be a non-classroom, non-academic way for us as specialists to engage in a generalized relationship with other people that uplifts and raises curiosity in the liberal arts. And so the way I'm doing that right now is with a trading card game. Nobody knows about it. You know, if you were to release this tomorrow, this would be the first place on the internet that anyone has ever heard me say this out loud. But I'm working on the liberal arts trading card game. It's called Canon, or Canon TCG for short. And just think like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, but it's like a little more accessible for like the homeschool mom who doesn't have time to like learn the super complicated mechanisms of Magic the Gathering, which is a super impenetrable, life-consuming kind of game. This is a lot more like Settlers of Catan. You know, it plays just a lot more casual, and it's not as cutthroat. Can be if a person really wants it to be, but it's a game that's all about collecting and reading texts so that you can curate a canon that can withstand the test of time and speak to people now and in the future. And so for me, I want to kind of close out by saying that this relates directly to Theory Underground, because I always talk about the genocide of voice. When you have a generalized functional illiteracy crisis occurring where people can read, but they can't really read, the voices of the past are not able to speak to us still, because people go, oh, it's too hard to read them. And or they read them and then they think they understand at a sort of surface level without understanding there's multiple ways of reading them, and being able to think through perspectives and interpretation and engage in interpretive in communities that practice interpretation. So how do we respond to this crisis? I think that what I'm talking about, what I've been developing, is just one of many ways that I hope to see emerge as a response to all of the crises that we've been talking about today.
Well, David, it's an incredible thing that you're doing. I can't wait. We need to have you back and we can talk. We didn't even get into farming. You mentioned at the end you were involved in sustainable farming. A lot of people don't even know homesteading means. You were raised in a context where you learned a lot of skills for, independence. These things they're not coded right or left. Often they're coded left, but these are incredibly valuable skills. They were the skills that our founding fathers venerated. That's what a person of leisure does, probably influenced by Socrates. So I look forward to a further conversation. I thank you for your time. And for people who want to learn more about you, what can they look up, or where would you send them? We'll put all that below the interview, but maybe you can just end by just telling people where they should go or what you want them to find by you.
Yeah, I'm suddenly realizing I didn't talk at all about McKerracher Family Farm. You can always look at McKerracherFamilyFarm.com, or I like the Instagram a lot. I have a hand in keeping it updated, and it's a great little glimpse into our life here at what will soon be a third generation family farm. But that's one of the three things that I'm juggling at any given time. So McKerracher Family Farm, Theory Underground, and Canon TCG, or the long name, Canon, the liberal arts trading card game. So those are the three things that I'm doing, and you can find all three on the internet.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, David McKerracher, for being with me on Becoming Human. I look forward to our partnership together with Philosopher Village and many more conversations. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.